Datura for depression. I have had depression, anxiety, and social anxiety all my life. I have been using Datura the last 3 months, and it helps a lot. I typically take one seed, rinse it with water, crush it between my teeth, and hold it in my mouth for several minutes before swallowing. Usually I notice a numbness in my lips, nose, and tongue within a couple of minutes. Next, a numbness and coldness begins to spread throughout my body. Usually within 5 minutes I realize that I feel some hope and optimism, and I am able to tackle my work, make decisions, talk to people, etc. Problems that seemed insurmountable minutes before suddenly seem minor. This antidepressant effect lasts about 4 hours, but I am often able to accomplish more in those 4 hours than I would in an entire week otherwise. I have a few worries. 1. Datura seems to only work once per day for depression, and sometimes it doesn't work at all. Taking a second seed after the first seed wears off doesn't seem to work, and sometimes the first seed doesn't work. The success rate for the first seed seems to be about 50% to 75%. I noticed this same quirkiness when using transderm scop patches, so I think it is not attributable to varying seed potency. 2. Scopolamine withdrawal syndrome is worrisome. People who use transderm scop patches for longer than 3 days often begin to experience motion sickness as a withdrawal symptom. I try to limit the Datura to every other day in hopes of minimizing this risk. 3. I have noticed a tolerance. Originally half a seed was sufficient, and a full seed seemed excessive. Now I use a full seed. 4. Scopolamine is used to create dementia symptoms in rats, and cholinergic drugs may contribute to dementia in older people like me. In conclusion, I wanted to say something positive about Datura. Whenever I take Datura I feel an overwhelming gratitude towards the plant for giving me some temporary relief from depression. I think if Datura is treated respectfully as medicine rather than a recreational drug, then it can be very positive. My hope would be that some neurologists might experience reports like this and try to understand the antidepressant effects of Datura to improve the treatment of depression. In the autumn of 2015 I had collected seeds from the 2 fine Datura needles I'd bought earlier that year. We crushed some dried seeds and mixed them in with hashish and tobacco joints, around 10 seeds per joint. No discernible effects, but did give a nice spicy peppery taste to the joints. Since then I've sowed the previous year's seeds, and by 2017 our greenhouse was more or less dominated by Daturas, a sea of dark green and scented white trumpet flowers. In the autumn of 2017 I began collecting large mature leaves, dried them and smoked them with tobacco. I thought I felt slightly spaced out from smoking the leaves, but it was so subtle that I put it down to placebo effect and from my head being full of Datura stories. Around this time I was reading everything I could find on the plant, compiling the most informative and entertaining parts. One night after smoking the leaves I sat in my bed in the dark and experienced an odd feeling like I was being pulled upwards, very subtle but a sensation I'd never felt before. It was like a portion of gravity was reversed, making my limbs feel at once heavy and light. It was very pleasant. The same night I had a vivid dream that I was able to fly. I was floating above my local town and down below people were waving and calling up to me to come down at once and that I shouldn't be up there. I felt a great sense of power over the people below and I just hovered up there smiling at them. This was probably also to a certain degree spurred on by the articles about witches and flying ointments I'd been reading, but it was nonetheless pleasant and the first flying dream I'd had since I was a small child. A few weeks later I tried eating some seeds. 10 seeds before bedtime. Nothing except a little dry mouth. A month later I went up to 15 seeds. Same result. A week later I tried the highest dose to date, 25 seeds. I remember waking up later that night needing to pee and experiencing considerably diminished motor skills and very noticeable light sensitivity. The light seemed to be boring itself into my skull regardless of where I looked. No problems peeing though. The next day I felt groggy and had an irritable, off feeling that was hard to shake. All these seeds were from last year's plants. 3 weeks ago I made a tea of one dried flower from last year. Put it in a cup and poured water the temperature of which was something between boiling and lukewarm. Added honey. Soon after I began to feel sluggish, slightly depressed and restless. I slept fine with no noticeable effects and the next day was business as usual. A few days ago I collected some ripening pods, laying in bed gently poking out the seeds with a chopstick. Then ate 3 seeds. Quite soon after I was overcome by an odd feeling. I suddenly felt wary of my surroundings which now seemed to contain a looming threat of some kind. I thought this must be what people feel when they've written about a weird feeling or like being in a horror film. Not intense in any way, but just an ominous air that's hard to shake once it's made its presence felt. Laying in bed that night I experienced an odd sensation that was totally new to me. I'd be on the cusp of sleep and suddenly I was unable to feel my body, like I was just a mind with no physical sensations telling me that my legs and arms, etc. were actually there. Though it was kind of relaxing and even pleasant in its own way, it prompted me to wiggle my extremities just to remind my mind that they were in fact there. The next evening I ate 5 seeds. While falling asleep I experienced something like thought acceleration. It was as if my thoughts were in an area outside of where they normally are, in a space that was large enough to give the sensation of them being flung around by a powerful force. Something was firing a barrage of random thoughts into my head, only for them to bounce into this outer area and be flung around by some kind of broken down sorting machine. It wasn't frightening as such, but more confusing and annoying, and I had a hard time falling asleep because of it. Fun fact, while I was lying in bed I was sure I heard the back door open, but didn't bother to go check because my dog didn't react and he normally reacts at the slightest sound. Late I went downstairs, it was freezing cold and the back door was wide open. This has never happened before. Did the spirit of the Datura plants enter the house and leave the door open? Or did I not close it properly and the wind blew it open? In any case it was a creepy addition to the evening. The evening after I was laying in bed after a long walk with my dog, engrossed in music through headphones, and the same bodiless sensation from 2 nights ago came over me. Though this time I was able to feel my body, it felt like I was sinking into the bed, my body felt like it was weak and withering. Some of it was no doubt down to being physically tired. But there was something else going on in tangent with that. It was what I imagined dying to feel like, a subtle but consistent pull downwards while at the same time feeling total fatigue and light as a feather. It was an interesting and actually quite relaxing sensation, albeit with that ominous feel to it which prompted me to move my body for fear of what would happen if I just lay still. I was surprised that the Datura seems to have a subtle but lingering effect that can cause an odd sensation to crop up a full 24 hours after ingestion. Also in my experience the fresher seeds seem to be more potent than older, dried seeds. I will continue to experiment with Datura, and maybe I'll reach a dose that puts me square in the middle of her maze. Until then I'll continue slowly beating around her bush, let her frolic in the greenhouse and enjoy her summer night scented flowers. March 5, 2010 First Datura experience. I had recently procured 500 Datura needle seeds after randomly noticing them being sold on a botanical website for £3, coming free with 80 morning glory seeds which I had tried before and had the utmost good time on. I remembered reading about Datura on a page about psychedelics and what hallucination actually means. I've always been interested in psychotic, I know it's not a word, activities, and this indeed did sound like an experience I had to have. I have been experimenting with drugs and more recently entheogens since I was about 14. I have tried alcohol, cannabis, ecstasy, piperazines, mephedrone, temazepam, beta blockers, salvia 20X, nutmeg, cocaine, speed, tramadol, morphine sulfate, morning glory seeds, butyl 1, methylone, DXM, and multiple others that I can't recall at this time. After some healthy research and reading a lot of insane reports, Datura reports being quite a hobby of mine for a few days, I decided to buy the 500 seeds. They came 2 days later on Friday. There was a small party that night and I planned on keeping the seeds for an occasion where I had nothing at all to do for 3 days. That plan soon changed when my friend Cal came over to my house for a little pre-booze before the party. I showed him the seeds and told him about a few trip reports and the history of usage. He wanted to dive in and try them. I warned him over and over that he probably shouldn't, seeing as he hadn't tried any psychedelics before, besides weed, if you want to count it, and that this was very powerful. He was having a party the next night for his birthday and I thought he might not manage. But despite my warning he took 10 seeds, and I wasn't going to let him do them alone, so I had 10 as well. Cal had no anxiety at this point as he had not read the terrifying reports I had read. I was anxious, worried when and if they would kick in. So let's call this point of first ingestion 0, about 6:30 p.m. My time scale may be a bit messed up and a lot of the night is probably lost in my memory. We were in my room, my parents are fine with us drinking etc. as long as we don't go mad. Quite a big room, 5.1 speakers, most people sit on the 2 beds or the PC chairs. D+010. Seeds ingested on a half-empty stomach, followed by a line of mephedrone which I thought would probably take the edge off. I knew now this would not be the psychotic, chill-out session I had hoped to have on Datura. D+30 minutes. My friend Ewa came over to join the pre-booze. We recently procured him his first ever ecstasy tablet which he asked me to have for him to try out. He ate it and then we suggested he tripped with us. He agreed half-heartedly, and we gave him 10 D plus 1 hour. Cal was growing impatient. This was typical, like 2 years ago when we first tried ecstasy, they happened to be very strong and after 20 minutes Cal got bored of waiting and ate too. I joined him and whoosh. He asked for more, I gave him another 5 and told him to take it easy. I had another 5 myself as did EU. Still drinking steadily at this point about 5 units down. About this time the rest of my friends came over. A friend, let's call him Pa, pulled out an ecstasy pill and cut it up giving me a line. At this point I feel anxious about the Datura as I was not expecting to try it. I gave Cal and you and some more because they were impatient despite my warnings. I waited a bit longer. Cal started to say the seeds were fake, he was annoying me at this point. Are you sure? I said, here's more then, dig in. The faster he got there the sooner he'd shut up. D plus 2 hours. Ingested about 25 off seeds by this point. Wasn't feeling much, mildly confused and just a bit all over the place, trying to keep things under control which don't even need in control. By this point I'd had about 10 units of alcohol and I decided to cut some more lines of methadone for us all. I cut small lines just as little boosts at this point. I see no point in taking massive lines then wanting more like some fiend. I decided to count the morning glory seeds I got free with the Datura. There were 90, not enough for anything worthwhile I thought, so Pa and myself decided to down half each just for the sake of it. D plus 2 hours and 30 minutes. I started to notice my mouth feeling very, very dry. This isn't a usual thing with methadone I thought. I kept drinking booze and water, but it didn't help at all. Cal and Ewan did not feel the dry mouth. D plus 3 hours and 30 minutes. We arrived at my friend's party in her flat. Dry mouth was still there but easily ignored. I was social easily enough. I spent some time walking about rooms talking to people, very right-minded but still anxious and a tad distracted because my current love interest seemed to be in a bad mood. Lots of people were very interested in the seeds. They found it hard to believe that these tiny seeds could provide a powerful trip. My friend Chris wanted to try them. I gave him 50 flat out. I first tried morning glory seeds with this boy and Pa. He doesn't like methadone or stimulants in general, so I thought he'd appreciate it. Cal kept asking for more. I gave him them. Ewa was content on his pill so we left him to it. D plus 4 hours and 30 minutes. Around about this time, Cal took a draw of and passed me an invisible cigarette. Of course I had read about this in other reports. Finally it had kicked in. I had not mentioned the phantom cigarette phenomenon to Cal before, nor had he read about it. This is also surprising because he doesn't smoke. The seeds weren't fake. I told him he passed me nothingness and he said no way, I must have dropped it. More from Cal later. In this hour I had drank up to about 15 units, had another few lines of pill and methadone and ate about 30 more seeds. A friend was rolling a joint, and he prompted me to put some seeds in. I had 500, so I thought fuck it, why not? We smoked it and we all decided it tasted like burning oak wood. Not much to say at this point. I'm too used to being drunk and full of methadone and pills to describe my thought processes as anything other than buzzing. I was dancing about the rooms talking to people, smoking, drinking, snorting and swallowing. I was certainly more disorientated than usual though. After this point time becomes too distorted and events are hard to put in order, but I will try my best. If you're reading and getting bored, the trip is still to come. D plus 5 hours and 30 minutes. Around this point Chris and I took the rest of the seeds. Cal had about 150 I would think. There was about 180 left, again I would think, a good size pile anyway. So we had about 90 just because we were bored of waiting and I had picked up the courage from all the alcohol and powder. We swallowed the lot. About half an hour I stood up and had no balance whatsoever. It was like the two from Fear and Loathing after Ether, like being very drunk, but I felt right-minded. After a while I think I regained balance. I remember doing handstands and cartwheels. Talking to Chris in the kitchen, his whole face turned into a big blur while I was up close. I realized the massive intake in a short period had worked well. When I closed my eyes I could see vibrant dark purples and greens. D plus 7 hours and 30 minutes. These 2 hours are a blur. My friends say that myself and Cal were both talking to ourselves and making very little sense. It was like dreaming while awake. I remember a group of us getting down to our underwear and dancing on a bed to a circus-type song on a video of a naked man in a horse head dancing while cooking mushrooms. Everyone's face was a big blur up close. My friends also say I was talking away to a kitchen knife. Eventually around this time Cal broke a few glasses and a vase. The flat owner got angry and started kicking people out. I planned to stay there that night, but Pa's girlfriend Rack let me stay at her house. It was a long walk and apparently I was quite a burden. I thought there were several other people with myself and Pa as we walked to Rock's house, including Rack herself. I kept stopping to wait on them. I was picking up litter off the ground, random bus tickets etc., thinking that they were bags full of cocaine and methadone and sometimes money. Pa tried to stop me, but I was fascinated with all the things the ground had to offer. Back at Rock's house, Rack found it hard to get me in bed because I was walking about her room intrigued. Pa said that I said something like I'm trying to figure out what to do next. I kept standing back up after lying down. There were electric bat-like horizontal lightning flashes flying around the room when Rack turned the light off. Eventually Rack had to tuck me in. Plus around 11 hours. This is when I start to remember things again. When I started to wake up, if I was awake at all. And I'm very unsure about the timing. Rock's carpet which I was sleeping on had triangular designs on it. The triangles ranged from white to yellow and the texture seemed to mimic that of methadone powder. So I thought I was cutting lines, but I found it very hard to tell which triangle was the methadone if at all. I soon realized how silly I was to try cutting lines on a carpet. The triangles made up bigger triangles and I kept attempting to pick up these 2D triangles. I kept hearing Pa, who was in the same room sleeping, talking. I also thought Ew had come back with us and was in the room. I had conversations with them, and kept saying what when I misheard, quickly realizing no one was even talking. This is when it started to peak. A few months ago Pa threw an alien baby, sticky silicone-like toy alien, onto the ceiling where it's been stuck there ever since. This alien baby turned into a massive centipede, about 10 centimeters by 4 centimeters. I didn't know it was the alien baby at first. The centipede started crawling towards Rock's bed where she was sleeping with Pa. I was tempted to wake them up as I did not want to go back to sleep with this massive fucker crawling about. It seemed perfectly normal at the time that this was happening. 4 spiders appeared, one at each side of the centipede, and all 5 insects were now on a spider web. The spiders engaged the centipede in an epic battle. Lots of tactics were used, but eventually the centipede won. I found myself cheering him on. He had taken over the spider web. At this point the centipede revealed itself as the alien baby, still moving along the spider web, eating each of the spiders in turn. Every time he moved he would bleed from the head. At one point he winked at me. When Rack was awake I said something like, "Did you know your alien baby is still alive? He lives off the dead spiders on your ceiling now." You've got to know that Rack and Pa weren't too fussed about me tripping on the floor, a bit upset because I kept them awake with my nonsense occasionally. But there was no real bad vibes. I actually did consider at the time that alien babies were living silicon-based life forms. The fact that Rack couldn't see him move meant little to me at the time. After a while I found myself talking to someone on the phone, to open my eyes to see that my phone was not in my hand. Plus 13 hours. After chilling for some time, without breakfast I left home to sleep and go through the process of feeling like shit for a while before going back out that night. However, I wasn't aware that I'd still be tripping. I walked to the train station. I felt as if my friends were around me all the time. It was like dreaming while awake. Things and people would be there, then disappear. I realized when I pulled my phone out that I could not read anything up close. In fact, my whole phone had changed. The cover had several differences to it, weird additions that I could see but could not feel. The language had changed and all my contacts were spelled differently or had random words added to them. I got to the station and there were a number of people around. Most noticeably a man standing under a lamppost with a clock attached to it. He was very tall. He said something that I couldn't hear and I said very loudly, "What?" And he disappeared along with 2 others behind him. I felt bad how I have not been able to engage with these random made-up characters like others have been able to. I felt like I should be embarrassed about looking like an idiot talking to myself, but I barely cared. The area behind where the tall man was standing was a train station toilet, but I remembered later on that this train station doesn't have a toilet, or a clock for that matter. When the train came, I got on and showed my pass to the ticket examiner, or maybe I showed it to no one. I looked out the window for a bit and suddenly all the seats, 5 or 6, were filled with people from my school which I left last year. I don't remember the chats we were engaging in, but I remember not wanting to talk to them and looking out the window occasionally to avoid eye contact. At one point when I did so, I turned back to see that they were all gone and that I had been talking to myself again. I turned round to see that none of the people, or possibly imaginary people, behind me were looking at me. I found none of this scary or unpleasant. I approach all things with an open mind and see no point in trying to fight the effects of anything I've put in my body. After the 10-minute train journey, and a 2-minute walk to my house, I was home. I don't remember if I talked to my mother when I came in, or anyone for that matter. But I quickly went upstairs. The next 7 hours I spent in my house prior to going out again was spent in confusion. I definitely had a shower, but have no recollection of it whatsoever. I turned on my computer and was on Facebook. I realized how hard it was to type. Here's a post from 4 p.m. People keep coming into then they gradually disappear. Every few minutes I hear whispers and turn around to see the nest wrapped in sides. Occasionally I catch them out and fair with to stay. True enough. Pretty sure some sort of thing in the corner is throwing bits of paper at me, but I can't find the pieces. Keep thinking I see might as well. And then 15 minutes later. Some cunt shining a torch around occasionally. I have a shit 1x. I was trying to explain that my friends from last night kept coming into my room and I could hear them talking around me. I would turn around and they disappear, or sometimes I would catch them out and they'd have to stay until I looked away again. Bits of paper kept landing on me, or flying past me. Something invisible was throwing them at me, but I couldn't find the paper lying around me, so I knew it wasn't actually happening. Not sure if this was before or after the paper, but I remembered a few days after the experience that I was using Facebook on my mobile. This is possible, but why I would ever do that on my shit phone is beyond me. I was probably confusing my laptop with my phone in the dream limbo. I remember looking on the floor to see a small maggot squirming on my carpet. I still don't know if it was real or not, but it is plausible. I remember thinking, shit, I really need to detox my room somehow. This is a disgusting state of affairs. I've never had to deal with a maggot before, but my first instinct was to kill it while picking it up with a pen then putting it in the bin, and so I did. The pen didn't work, so I used a pencil. I was confused about what I was doing socially that night. The last 2 nights, Thursday and Friday, involved going to the same flat. I assumed for some reason that I was having people round for another pre-booze before going to the same flat, then to Cal's 19th birthday party. Only the latter was true. I sent a wide range of undecipherable texts that my friends and I laughed about later. Cal kept coming into my room. I was expecting him to be coming round. He wasn't really, I just imagined he was. I was angry because if he was to really show up, how could I distinguish him from his clone illusions? Whenever I was to be called the name on the phone, for example Annie Rosetta McCormack is calling, would never correspond to who was actually calling. Some of the names that appeared to be calling, I realized later I didn't even know, or I have never had their number. This resulted in some embarrassing phone conversations with drug dealers and phone calls which I wrongly deemed to be pranks. I actually thought my phone was broken until late Sunday afternoon when I recharged my phone and realized my silliness. Around this time in my house I was also smoking imaginary cigarettes, remembering I had it in my hand whilst resting it against my lap and quickly jumping trying to avoid burning. I quickly realized I had no cigarettes, but ghostly memories were there of lighting up and the taste being in my mouth. Bizarre. Somehow I had managed to get a plan. I was to get the next train to meet my friends in a park before going to the usual flat owned by Anna, and well, I assumed that was what was happening in my still Datura-induced haze. I noticed before I left my house that my computer desk had several rainbow-tinted drops of water on it. When I touched these bits of water my hand would go right through them. They would not move and I could not feel them. I experimented with them a bit, and discovered the only way to get rid of them was by flicking them with my finger. However, some of them would not be moved by this process. I had 10 minutes till the train. I came to the conclusion that they were germs and my room must be filthy, maggots and massive germs. I started to realize that these germs were reproducing through mitosis right before my eyes, rapidly taking over the desk. What an amazing thing to behold without a microscope, I thought. I had 10 minutes to the train. If I left I would most certainly come home the next day to realize that my room had been taken over by these germs. I had to destroy them, I realized. I went down and grabbed a cloth, bathroom spray and a bowl of warm water and started scrubbing at the ghostly dots. Some would just not go away. I realized the next day that the ones which would not go away were actually little chips taken out in my desk, and the ones that did move were probably just crumbs or something of the sort. The rest of the day/night consisted of basic confusion of what I was doing, and my perception of my phone still being a bit off. Later on, I got very drunk and stoned at Cal's party, and the next thing I know I'm waking up in a park 20-odd miles away from Cal's house at 2 p.m. with 2 backpacks, one filled with spices including nutmeg. I had hazy recollections of walking through fields and around lakes attempting to hitchhike. I'm not sure if I can blame Datura for this. But it's not as if I'm not used to this kind of thing happening. By then my vision was normal. Looking back, I'm glad I had the experience, though I wish Cal hadn't tempted me to try it on this one occasion. It is definitely a weekend to remember, and I would rate it as a positive experience. but would only recommend it to those who have a high level of self-awareness, and I urge people to keep an open mind while trying Datura. This experience happened last weekend, 5th of March 2010, and since then I have tried lower doses of Datura on the 11th and 12th. On the 11th the effects came on quicker, no hallucinations, just confusion and mild anticipation, perhaps a slightly higher level of thought. Massive pupils and I felt really tired. I smoked some weed as well. I slept for 16 hours, very refreshing. The next morning I made a tea out of 50 seeds, which put me in a mild state of delirium for the full day. By Saturday morning I had amazing closed-eye visuals and felt very euphoric. I have noticed since Friday that I can remember so many more of my dreams in finer detail, and the dreams seem to mean more to me. I have been lucky to not have a bad trip with any hallucinogens so far, and am looking forward to trying more, perhaps Datura again. Past drug usage. I have used caffeine, alcohol, nitrous, mushrooms, cannabis, LSD, MDMA, amphetamine, ketamine, ayahuasca and Hawaiian babywood rose seeds. Some time ago I had a prescription for 50 mg sertraline per day for my moderate depression. I never smoked a cigarette in my life. Current drug usage. I drink small amounts of alcohol, 12 milliliters of ethanol, almost daily, 5 to 6 times a week. I also vaporize cannabis 3 times a week, take kratom once a week and mushrooms once a month. I stopped using chemical drugs, including sertraline, some months ago after I met my current, and first, girlfriend. Preparation. A couple months ago I bought 200 grams of kratom, a mix of green vein strains, which I filled into size 00 gelatin capsules with a capsule machine. I also bought a large supply of capsules filled with turmeric and some black pepper for kratom potentiation. Some days before this experience I acquired some high-quality cannabis sativa and pre-grinded it so I could simply put it in my vaporizer. I once bought a package of 500 Datura stramonium seeds, which I have not used until this experience. I have read in an online forum that a small amount of Datura could potentiate kratom, so I decided to try this combination with a few seeds. I know from previous experiences that grapefruit juice can also magnify the effects of kratom, but I had none at hand that day. Set and setting. It was a typical Friday evening and I was in a good mood because I had 2 free days ahead of me without any obligations. I am satisfied with my job, I love my girlfriend and I have no family problems, so I had nothing to worry about. I spent nearly the whole duration of the experience in my rather large bedroom. Experience. 8:30. I swallow a capsule of turmeric like I always do an hour before taking kratom. I also chew and swallow 5 Datura stramonium seeds. I talk to my girlfriend on the phone for a while, and then I walk downstairs and have a little chat with my father. 9:30. Back in my room, I put 10 capsules of kratom, around 8 grams, into a glass of water so they dissolve roughly at the same time and drink all of it before the capsules start falling apart. In the meantime, I read a book, Trainspotting by Irvin Welsh, to kill some time. I also drink a light alcoholic beverage, 8 milliliters ethanol. 10 o'clock. I put around 0.3 gram ground cannabis in my vaporizer and set the temperature to 185 degrees Celsius. I watch an episode of Family Guy on Netflix while vaping the herb. As the effects of the THC take hold, I also start to feel the opioid properties of kratom, like a tingling sensation all over my body, itchy skin, shallow breathing and euphoria. 10:30. I switch off my TV and just lay on my back in my bed. Soon I enter a hypnagogic state where I drift in and out of consciousness with vivid visions. Unlike psychedelic experiences, where the things I see are made up of fractals and other geometry, the scenes I witness in this state look real and normal without any unusual colors or pattern, just like in a dream. At one point I see an island somewhere in the ocean with a beautiful beach, which is then replaced by other imaginary locations I have never seen before in my life. 1:30. I gradually return to sobriety as the THC in my body gets metabolized, however, I can still feel the effects of the kratom. I have no difficulties falling asleep. The next day I wake up refreshed and full of energy with no hangover. Conclusions. It has been a long time since I last experienced nodding, that hypnagogic state, on kratom. I think the Datura seeds helped me achieve that state of consciousness. I am looking forward to trying this combination again, maybe with only 3 seeds next time. I do not want to use any more seeds, as I have great respect for Datura and other scopolamine-containing plants and I try to avoid having a real delirium.
I collected some seed pods from a plant in the neighborhood, exact species unknown. I read some experience reports, positive and negative, and decided to try. My primary reason for doing this was curiosity and wanting to have a psychedelic experience. I have done psychedelic substances before, but never tried Datura, and also because I was feeling stuck and wanted to gain some perspective on a work/career related situation. I am not on any prescription medication and did not use any other substances before ingesting. I consider myself fairly well balanced emotionally, and I was up for the challenge and feeling adventurous. I had a few days off work, so timing was good. Before I get into it, based on my own experience, here are some strongly suggested precautions. I advise to have at least 24 hours post-consumption to resume normal activity. If you have to go to work or do something important the next day, don't eat Datura. This is not an ideal outdoor activity. I would also advise to have something on hand for the possibility of a headache and nausea. At 11 p.m. I consumed the contents of one small seed pod. The seeds were white in color, therefore not ripe. Ripe seeds are brown, and did not have a hard shell, so it was unnecessary to grind them up. The pod probably contained approximately 30 to 40 small seeds, didn't count. I did this in the comfort of my apartment. I live alone. By 12:30 a.m. I had a substantial body buzz and my legs felt weak. I found it difficult to walk. After approximately 1 a.m. I could not keep my eyes open and went to bed. I didn't sleep well, tossing and turning, and woke up frequently to drink water and go to the bathroom. I found it difficult to initiate the stream of urine. My depth perception was off, reaching for the roll of toilet paper was a challenge. During one of the bathroom trips I forgot where the toilet paper was. My mouth and throat were extremely dry. Every time I took a sip of water I had the physical sensation that it wasn't going down into my stomach and had to burp to make the sip go down. This combined with the dry mouth and the need to drink almost constantly. Not fun. At 8:30 am when I got up to go to the bathroom I had a mean headache and mild nausea, for which I took a painkiller and an anti-nausea tablet. I went back to sleep and didn't wake up until 5 p.m. I had colorful dreams, the contents of which I do not remember. When I got up the unpleasant physical sensations were thankfully all gone. I did not feel hungry at all even though I slept for 16 hours. I was still under the influence. I went out for a walk. My perception was different. All lights seemed brighter. I was noticing all the places where light was reflecting off of objects. At one point I thought all cars got washed today because they were all so shiny. I went to the park, where there was a small lake. The water was liquid silver. The rustling of the leaves in the wind was beautiful. Some of the trees had already lost all their leaves, and the bare branches against the dusk sky was also quite striking. I had that reverie feeling. I hung out with a group of people briefly, which was interesting. I could sense their essences and emotional states, more so than usual. I work in healthcare and can read people well. I did get my insight on the work situation. In a nutshell, I was being fearful and made excuses to justify not trying to find work in a different city. Moving is scary, and I need to take my own advice. I gave this advice to a friend who was trying to decide between a local and non-local job, and I told her to pick the one that scares you more and do that. I can't be ruled by fear, and so, the lesson from the park is: when the wind blows, the tree branches bend, because if they didn't bend they would break. The wind is blowing and I need to bend and see where it will take me. In conclusion, the experience was quite taxing physically, more so than I anticipated. See suggested precautions above. I do not regret it and would do it again if I ever feel stuck like this again. It was like an internal reboot button. So, I have this friend, who will remain nameless, who informed my boyfriend and I about these seed pods growing on someone's front lawn near my high school. The first thing that came to my mind was free hallucinogens. He suggested that we smoke the plant, or brew some tea with it. We decided it would be much easier to just eat a few of the seeds and see what happened. Day 1. October 27, 2005. My boyfriend and I had experimented with the seeds the night before, but we felt no effects. He didn't want to bother with any further experimentation, but I, on the other hand, am a very curious person. I decided that maybe if I took a few capfuls of the stuff, I would have a better trip. Man, was I ever wrong. 4:30 p.m. I take a capful of the Datura seeds at my boyfriend's house, even though he kept telling me not to. We were just on our way to my apartment and I decided to take another capful on the way to the bus stop. 5:15 p.m. I'm laying on my bed watching TV with my boyfriend drinking Jones's soda when my head starts to feel funny. My body is all tingly and my head feels inflated. I'm also very, very thirsty from what I can remember. 5:20 p.m. I am delirious and the hallucinations have started to kick in. I thought I was back in my boyfriend's basement and I turned to him, grabbing my guitar, and said, "Okay Chris, I got to go home now." And to my surprise, he says, "But Mel, you are home." And I'm like, "Chris, that's not funny, I got to get to class." I was now hallucinating that I was in front of my school and I was grabbing my guitar to go to class. 5:45 p.m. My boyfriend informs my mom that I have ingested Datura because he's so concerned about my hallucinations, and my lack of ability to speak, or even form words. We go outside while my mom calls the poison control center, and according to my boyfriend, I couldn't even hold my cigarette or stand up properly. My purse would continuously slip off my arm and my cigarette would keep falling out of my hand because my mind was no longer with me. 6 p.m. Poison control has reserved a space in the emergency room for me because I had ingested a poisonous substance which the hospital has heard little about. My mom makes me put my shoes back on, which wasn't easy. I kept putting two different shoes on because I was having trouble deciding which one was prettier than the other. 6:20 p.m. We are on our way to the hospital that is about 5 minutes from my apartment and I'm nodding out in the front seat. When my mom parks the car, I'm passed out and worrying both her and my boyfriend as they frantically try to wake me up. We get into emergency and Chris sits me down in a wheelchair, where I begin to pick the fluff off of the sweater that the black lady sitting next to me was wearing. I was acting like a retard. I can't remember anything except for what my mom or boyfriend told me. After this, later that night, I'm in a room in emergency and I'm being restrained because I won't stay still so that the staff can sedate me. My heart rate was soaring over the normal number. It was like my heart was running a marathon for 24 hours. After being sedated, my body is pumped with charcoal while my boyfriend stands next to me, but far enough away like the doctor said, in case I threw up. Day 2. October 28, 2005. I'm still sedated and remember nothing from the night before. I have been moved to the pediatric ward where I have my own room with a border of hockey players, a TV, and my favorite teddy bear. I leave my comatose state around dinner time, but I'm still experience strong hallucinations. 7 p.m. Daddy daycare is on the TV, but I don't remember watching it. My boyfriend and mom are still with me and have been for the entire day. Neither of them knew whether I would come out of this without any permanent damage to myself. My boyfriend had mixed my peas into my mashed potatoes for me, like I always do, and promised that he would stay with me, no matter what happened. 7:10 p.m. I finish eating and am now capable of holding conversations with my mom and boyfriend. I supposedly performed an exorcism on my mom because I thought she was possessed. Her face kept morphing and bugs were crawling out of her eye sockets. There were also bugs crawling all over the floor of the hospital room as well. My boyfriend's logo on his shirt turned into a bunch of feathers. I saw a little puppy running around the room, and I kept seeing pixies and stars everywhere. Stars kept covering my hands and I had to keep brushing them off. 8 p.m. My boyfriend's mom and his sister came to visit me, along with my grandfather. I was slowly returning to normal, but not quite. Only an hour or two before, I had come to the conclusion that while I was sedated, I was surgically given a penis. It was really a catheter, but I didn't know that. Zena, my boyfriend's mom, asked me about the hockey players on the ceiling and I informed her that one of them was beating the crap out of the other, and that there was a boat sailing by her. 8:20 p.m. Two security guards come into my room as I wheeled myself around on the wheelchair, gaining the nickname Wheels from my boyfriend and grandfather. The security guards told us that I was being moved to a better room because a baby was being moved into the room I was in. I wanted Chris to push my wheelchair, but they wouldn't let him. They wheeled me to the basement of the hospital, right towards the psychiatric ward. I was totally confused. I didn't know why they were taking me there and I was so scared. 8:30 p.m. The woman working the night shift informs us that I'm staying there for a few days under observation, just to make sure that my hallucinations do stop and that I make it out okay. By then I was only having mild hallucinations and knew exactly what was going on. They wouldn't let my mom or boyfriend stay overnight and I started bawling because I was so afraid. They forced a sleeping pill on me, and since they had a smoking room down there, my mom had to get a doctor's note saying that even though I was under 18, I was allowed to smoke in there. 9 p.m. My mom comes back with my suitcase of pajamas, toiletries, makeup, etc. and tucks me into my bed. A security guard sits on a chair in my room keeping an eye on me because I was the youngest/most sane person in the psychiatric ward. The chair was doing some shit out of Jumanji, and vines were coming out of it and stuff. Every time I blinked, it would go away and start all over again. Day 3. October 29, 2005. I finally fell asleep around 10 o'clock that night and woke up well rested in the morning. I was still seeing barely visible insects crawling on the floor, but within an hour, all the hallucinations had finally stopped. I got up and took a shower and did my makeup to make myself feel better. I spent the morning watching TV until my family came to visit at 2 o'clock until 8 p.m., visiting hours. Day 4. October 30th, 2005. After watching TV for a good 4 hours, I have one last visit with a psychiatrist who says I can leave as soon as my family arrived. I literally jumped for joy. I was finally getting out of that hellhole. I could finally go home. 2 p.m. My mom and boyfriend get to the hospital and I was already packed and ready to go. I flipped off the staff who had been hassling me for the entire duration of my admittance and made my way out. I got more and more excited the closer we got to the doors. I was like a kid making my way into a candy store. It was a beautiful day and it felt great to be alive. The three of us got back to my apartment and my mom and boyfriend told me everything that I have just told you guys, because I can't remember anything after putting my shoes on until watching Daddy Daycare. My mom also told me that the doctors said if I didn't go to the hospital, I would have went into cardiac arrest and died. That means I would have had my funeral on Halloween. I would have died on Thursday, October 27, 2005 and been buried on my favorite holiday, Halloween. That is my story about how easy it can be to get carried away. Curiosity killed the cat, and it nearly killed me. Parts of my experience are humorous to look back on, but I almost died.
The craziest experience of my life. I was 18, student at a United World College once upon a time. Studying the International Baccalaureate, IB, for 2 years can be very stressful, especially when you are studying in another country, away from home, in a hostel full of brain cases who mostly love to work. Well, I wasn't one of them. In my first year I smoked a lot of cannabis, and in the second trimester of that year I even sold hash brownies in the form of waffles. I smoked weed almost every day. I had a good time. I have been spiked on ecstasy before, and I think been spiked with cocaine once too, mixed in the weed I bought. Those 2 nights were intense, but nothing compared to what I experienced with moonflower, Datura anoxia, I later found out. They grow all around the hostel, but not many people at school knew about them until recently. I'd heard rumors that they were hallucinogenic, and always having wanted to do shrooms, and never having had the opportunity, I was very excited at this new drug. The first time I tried it nothing happened, apart from a feeling of nausea, and a strange feeling in my throat. This was possibly because I had only used the petals of the flowers, and not the whole flower, with pollen stems included. I had boiled them and drank them with a friend, about 4 flowers. Nothing happened, but then a term later I heard that my friend from Ecuador, where they are apparently very common, had tried it before, and that she had gone mal for the whole night. When I asked her about it, she said that it was very intense and did not advise me to do it because it was very dangerous, but I kind of ignored her warning. I was on a drug contract at school, and they regularly tested me to see if I had been doing weed. so I couldn't smoke a joint when I wanted to get high. I was walking back from gym and dinner with a friend from Mexico, when we came across the plants on our usual path up to hostel. Very keen, I told him about the plant, and said that I would try it that evening. He decided to join me, and off we went, picking flowers. Coming across my Ecuadorian friend, she got very angry that I did not heed her warning, but she could not convince me apart from telling me that one flower was more than enough. So we dropped all our flowers but kept one each, and went up to my room, where we each crushed our own flower and made tea with them in separate cups. Adding sugar and juice to taste, we drank the potion, occasionally swallowing a piece of flower that was not crushed properly. Getting the familiar feeling of dry throat, I decided to drink a lot of water and watch a movie with my friend. After half an hour or so, he suddenly get up, and says, "I feel something," and just walked out of my room. I tried to follow him, but upon getting up, I realized that it had hit me too and I could not walk anymore. Another two friends of mine, a Swazi and an American, came into my room and asked what was up with the first friend. I told them about it, and one of them, being a stoner too, convinced the other to join him and ourselves on the party. They followed the same routine with a flower each, and I cannot remember them drinking the tea, but I remember trying to vomit in the toilet, but only sound coming out and no matter. The rest is blurry, but I will account according to what I do remember and according to what friends told me. After trying to puke, I needed to pee, after having drunk so much water. I peed and I peed and I peed, but it wouldn't stop, so I decided to put my trousers back on while I was still peeing, of course wetting myself in the process. I must still have been a bit conscious, because I tried to change, only I thought that I was changing in my room, but actually in the bathroom, because they found my trousers in the bathroom the next day. I went back to my room in my boxers only. I didn't realize this, where my two other friends were apparently having a party. I couldn't talk to them, but the movie was still playing on quite a high volume, and this was during prep time. A supervising teacher walked into my room, where I was trying to stand up. Come to think of it, I don't know how I got back to my room, and asked us what was going on. I tried to say nothing was wrong, and said goodnight, but everything came out very strange indeed, and at 6:30 p.m. you don't really wish the check-in teacher good night, because you would see him when checking in anyways. He asked us to stay in my room, and rushed off. My two friends panicked and I think they might have run off or at least tried to. My brother told me the next day that he came across my first friend the previous night and that he had been talking nonsense when spoken to. He had said that he had last seen me in Pakistan at a party with my two stepmothers about 7 months ago. I did not even know him 7 months ago. I do not have any stepmothers, and I have never been to Pakistan. Next thing I know, I'm standing in my room, I don't know where I was in reality, and the supervising teacher grabs me by the arm and drags me somewhere. I do not remember much, but next thing, I'm standing in the common room, and my best friend from Norway is trying to put some shorts onto my body. I was later told that all three friends were also in the common room, one clutching a toilet seat and mumbling that it was perfect like this, another rubbing his hands over the toilet seat and saying it was beautiful, the other trying to check his corridor in, and shouting that some of them must turn down their music. There was no music in the common room, and none of the people he was checking in were there. Besides, he was holding an imaginary clipboard and pen. The rest of the early evening is a blur, but without knowing it, we were all transported to hospital, where the party began. I thought I was in detention and did not recall that I was high at all. I kept complaining that they should not keep us in for detention at night and that I would rather do manual labor next time. I said the detention was too long, that they weren't allowed to keep us in for the night, and that I would most certainly complain. I also kept asking why I was in detention in the first place, that I had gone the previous week so there was no reason to keep me in. I was restless for the whole night. And what a night it was. They kept putting me on the drip and I kept pulling it out. I remember doing this once, but I did it more than that. I had to go to the toilet constantly, I vaguely remember that, and although I believed I was urinating, they said I wasn't, and wouldn't let me go to the loo anymore when I asked them if I could. This made me angry at times. I was now in detention and I wasn't even allowed to go to the toilet. I remember constantly sitting up for some reason, and my friend's father, whom I did not recognize at the time, kept pushing me back down on the bed and asked me to lie still and go to sleep. I said okay, but got up again every 5 seconds. I remember reading from a heavy book and making notes in a notepad. The book was the key to something, but I cannot remember what. All of a sudden I got a fright from something, and I dropped the book, the notepad, and the pencil. I wanted to pick them up, but they were gone. I was looking for them for so long, until my friend's father asked me to lie still. I said okay, and after 10 seconds I would start worrying about it and look for it again. I turned over all my blankets and looked under the hospital bed, but there was nothing. The same happened with my keys, my flash drive, and my cell phone, all which I had left in my room at school anyways. I kept being asked to lie still, but I was so worried about losing everything that I just had to keep looking and turn my bed, mattress, blankets and even clothes upside down and inside out. I was told that at one stage I had asked where my girlfriend was. They had told me that she wasn't around, and I gave a sneaky smile and rolled and smoked an imaginary joint. When I sobered up a little bit, I sort of knew what I was doing, but I still didn't know I was high or in what trouble I was. I was asked to pee in a cup so that they test my urine for traces of cannabis or other substances. Somehow I knew that they shouldn't find out, and I was used to being urine tested, so I recognized it, even without them telling me what it was for, so I ran towards the bathroom in the hospital hall, but ran straight past it as I had been doing for the whole night, and was directed into the bathroom by the doctor. Instinctively, I locked the door and was happy when I found out I could just put a little bit of pee and mostly tap water into the cup. Upon returning the cup, the doctor commented that it was cold and see-through, but I was still very high and merely said that that's how I had been pissing recently. No further questions were asked. Then they wanted to take a blood sample. I panicked cause now they'd surely find out, and started saying that I was shit scared of needles, not remembering or noticing that I had a drip in my arm. I remember getting up at one stage and walking over to a friend who was also on the drip, and in the same state as I. I was also annoyed with the drip and was looking for scissors to cut it off. Noticing a tube in his arm and thinking it were a pair of scissors, I tried to pick it up, but it hurt him so he cried out, "Ow!" I don't remember much of what happened next. In the early morning, I saw many people leaving the room, while it was actually only 3 people leaving, the doctor, and 2 nurses, and I felt that it was unjust that they go and I can't. I complained again and again. Next thing I remember, I'm in the hospital bed again and my brother is standing next to me. He had been informed of what had happened to me and was pretty worried and disappointed. All of a sudden there were ants all over my bed, and the TV turned into a cat. The other TV, which was also off, was showing horrible images of a monster drowning a baby in a well. Another friend of mine had tears in her eyes when she told me how scared she had been that I would have died, gone crazy, or fall into coma. My girlfriend and her mother arrived on scene, and my girl was very upset, bawling her eyes out. I was still seeing insects on the bed and telling people that they should just look closer if they couldn't see them. I was angry that they didn't believe me, but then my first friend who had drank the tea with me shouted from the other side of the room that he could see them too. He was still talking Spanish to the nurses, they only understand English, and babbling on about nothing. The 2 other friends who had drank the tea a bit later had been smoking imaginary cigarettes all night, and one of them had asked his mom if she was a volunteer worker and commented that she was very nice to him, asking her how much she got paid to look after him so well. When a nurse had walked by, he had asked his mom, thinking it was someone else, "Do you think that dude has weed for me?" The other had been talking to our deputy principal about how much he loves weed, and they had been talking to each other in a conversation of nonsense babbles, not words, but it had seemed that they could understand each other. For another 3 days my vision was kind of blurry and I could not talk long sentences, because I would lose concentration. But now I think I'm 100% fine again. I got expelled from school, although I will write exams there. My girlfriend and I are still together and she just hopes I won't do any drugs again. Although I admit the experience was quite hectic, I really enjoyed it, and had I not been restrained in hospital, I would have had an even better time. Although I would do it again if it were not for exams or for my girlfriend, I would take it in a smaller dosage, maybe half a flower in tea? And make sure someone is watching me and doesn't let me get into trouble. The dosage I took was dangerous, according to the doctors, but in controlled amounts I would recommend it. Not for the paranoid. Enjoy and take care. Personally, I gave up all substance abuse, once a while getting drunk and replacing it with going to the gym, working out everything bad that consumed over the past 4 years of my life.
Just recently have I discovered that the hundreds of plants growing uncontrollably on my family's farm are Datura. For years I've been overlooking the plant as if it were any other until a horse of ours got sick from ingesting quite a few leaves. The vet came out to check on him and informed me that the plant, aka Jimson weed, was poisonous if ingested by animals, but had a quite pleasant high if ingested or smoked by people. For a little over a year I ignored this information, along with the plant, until riding home from school with a friend. Somehow we began talking about the shortage of marijuana we've been having, and the Jimson weed growing around my house was brought up. Really enthusiastic, she told me a friend of hers ate a few of the same seeds and tripped over 12 hours. I almost laughed, but told her I would check it out, and sure enough the seeds were identical to Datura stramonium. For nearly a week I researched Datura, and learned more than I thought possible about it. I thought it was a little much for what I'm used to because I've never gotten stronger than marijuana or ecstasy, but decided it was an experience I was ready for. Unfortunately I was very wrong. At around 9:30 on a Thursday night I chewed and swallowed a teaspoon of the very bitter black, mature seeds, and washed them down with Gatorade. I chose Gatorade because of the intense dehydration I had read about. I had a sitter, we can call her Tori, which is needed while on this stuff. Around 10:45 my mouth became so dry it was sickening and impossible to talk. I began to talk what sounded perfectly normal in my head, but gibberish to my ears and to Tori. It would have been very frustrating if I had needed to say something important, but since I didn't, Tori and I found it entertaining. I got the dilated pupils and the constant using the bathroom, but besides that nothing too intense. About an hour later Tori and I decided to crash, which was fine with me because my throat was so dry it was no fun talking. I'm not sure what time I woke up, but it must have been around 10 a.m. because Tori had to be at work by 12. I was tripping hard, but nothing seemed too unnormal to me. Random people watching me go to the bathroom, Tori disappearing in the middle of our conversations, and spending hours in front of the mirror talking to my new friend, my reflection, seemed very normal. Every once in a while I would snap back to myself and realize I was tripping, and kind of laugh or shake my head at myself, only to find me doing it all over again a few minutes later. At one point me and my sister, who knew nothing about me taking the seeds, were making my bed and I kept telling Tori to get up so we could finish, but she'd just stare at me even though I asked her more than once. My sister kept asking, "Who are you talking to?" And I would answer Tori, and point to the corner of my bed where she was lying down. A little shocked and kind of scared, my sister said, "Tori left 20 minutes ago." And not believing her, I frantically began throwing back my bed covers expecting to find her and prove she was in my bed. I kept putting things down that disappeared constantly, and walk around the house talking to every inanimate object that would talk back. None of this was too strange until I looked in my closet. Me and a couple people I had never met before, obviously hallucinations, were going through my closet to pick out an outfit to wear to school, even though I wasn't going to school for a few more days. I got kind of lonely after they disappeared, but kept looking for an outfit anyways. Suddenly I spotted a shirt of mine with a few little white bugs on it. I panicked and my mind raced, what if these bugs are on me? I mean, I wear these shirts. I instantly became paranoid. I looked on my arm and saw bugs digging underneath and crawling under my skin. I ran out of my room and found my mom, screaming to her about the bugs on my body. She said she saw nothing, but I figured she was trying to comfort me. I clawed at the bugs, but they were too fast and strong for me. My mom's first reaction was that I was having a bad acid trip, but from the seriousness and paranoia in my voice she started taking me seriously. She immediately called every doctor to see if any of them could take an emergency visit, and drove me over to the first one available. FYI, because of this I now have lost a great deal of respect for doctors. The doctor immediately looked at me and decided I was having an unexplained allergic reaction to who knows what. By now I am red all over and bleeding in areas where I tried to get these bugs. She figures the redness is my skin breaking out, and not inflicted by my own self. I now have to apply this cream over my entire body and continue to take a million antibiotics for something I don't even have, and only I know I never really had. So whoever decides they want an unforgettable experience, please be careful. Being scared beyond belief is no fun, and let me add that nothing about the entire trip was the least bit fun, or pleasant. It was weird and confusing, and 100% out of control. The pupil dilation left me totally letter blind for a week, the dry mouth left my throat hurting for an entire week, and not to mention a mild depression about myself. If you're looking for a good high for the night, skip Datura.
Walking Dead syndrome from the vantage point. I'm in my mid-30s. I'm a little over 6 feet in height and weigh about 200 pounds. I've done about all the major known drugs imaginable. During the late 90s, I tripped on LSD quite frequently. The experience I'm about to describe happened in the summer of 2013 and is beyond anything I've ever experienced before. I've heard people describe religious experiences on LSD, but of the dozens of times I've tried it, I've never had anything as remotely profound occur to me as did with woodrose seeds. It was late August and I was reuniting with a longtime friend. I will refer to this friend as Papa Smurf, for reasons that should become obvious. Papa Smurf introduced me to LSD back in high school. Even back then he knew about the legal highs, the exotic plants and the more unusual designer drugs that most people never heard of. He went on to earn an advanced degree in psychology, but he remained interested in altered states of consciousness. Papa Smurf was picking me up early in the morning to go hiking in the backcountry of the nearby national forest. I had planned on being a guinea pig and would be trying something called Hawaiian baby woodrose. Being a guinea pig for Papa Smurf wasn't new and usually turned into an interesting experience to say the least. We got to the trailhead at about 9 in the morning. That particular trail began at an old cemetery. That's where Papa Smurf pulled out a miniature Ziploc bag filled with what looked to be a few grams of tan powder. Papa Smurf had used a coffee grinder to pulverize the seeds into a powder. I asked how many? Papa Smurf replied, 23. I had no idea at the time of what constituted a dose. I immediately took the bag, opened it up, unloaded the powdered seed into my mouth and swallowed with the help of a few gulps of water. It wasn't too bad, but I did notice a metallic taste in my mouth that lingered. Over the next half hour Papa Smurf asked several times if I felt anything. If I did, it was subtle. Approximately 45 minutes into the walk something hit me like a freight train. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but mostly it was a feeling that something big had happened. By this point in time, I was seeing tracers and everything seemed vibrant and different, but the visuals didn't matter, as it was as if the essence of my very being had changed in some fundamental way and I couldn't put my finger on it. About an hour into the hike I noticed that the trees seemed endless and I blurted out loud, "There sure are a lot of trees." Papa Smurf replied, "Yes there are." I felt so inadequate because that's not what I meant to say. For me the forest had somehow become a fractal or kaleidoscope. It was supernatural somehow, but I could not find the language to describe it. From this point on I felt like I had lost my ability to communicate. I know I must have been sweating and looked horrible. It was so challenging to walk. At some point Papa Smurf took us up trail and down a rocky creek bed. We ended up at a tree that had a protrusion that looked so much like a human head that I felt inclined to treat the tree as if it were a person. I sat down on the bank there and remember thinking that if I mentally let go I would die. Papa Smurf spent the next few hours stacking stones into immense stacks. While Papa Smurf entertained himself by stacking rocks, I faced an inner dialogue with myself. Somehow I felt death was imminent. All I had to do was go. I was scared to let go, but for some reason I felt I had to die. I then began to feel as if I were vibrating. Everything was vibrating and I was part of it. At some point I opened my eyes and Papa Smurf was in my face and looked really scared. I told him I was okay. He said, "I know you're okay," but I could see he was scared for me. I told him I had just got to let go and I closed my eyes and went back to the vibrations that had pleasantly consumed me. Somehow in my mind let go meant die, which in turn meant to return to a vibrational state. Papa Smurf later told me that I was shaking and trembling as if I were freezing, but he didn't want to say anything to me then because he didn't want to scare me. I could have stayed where we were for hours longer, but eventually Papa Smurf wanted to go. My reality at this time was shattered. I had no choice but to follow Papa Smurf. Not only was my mind blown, but I was physically exhausted. I felt like a zombie. At some point we were walking through the forest and Papa Smurf says, "Oh my God, look at the panda over there by the bamboo." At this point I'm unable to talk, but I'm really wondering where we're at and how the fuck we got to some place where there's bamboo and panda bears. Papa Smurf always liked to fuck with you in little ways, but this time I truly couldn't be sure of reality. As we walked I began to realize that I had died on that creek bed back there. Nothing seemed strange anymore. I kept repeating out loud, "I'm here, you're here, and that's just how it is." Papa Smurf said I kept repeating that phrase. I couldn't carry on a conversation, but what I was really thinking was that I had died many times before and every time it was with Papa Smurf. It had just happened again and that's just how it was. I felt like I was in some kind of purgatory where life kept repeating itself up to that same moment. Every once in a while Papa Smurf would fuck with me. At one point he said with a straight face, "I can't believe we've been out here in the jungle for 14 days already." I couldn't say anything back to him, but I certainly had an inner dialogue in my head. I thought, have we really been out here for 14 days? I even wondered what country we were in. But then another part of me said, that's just Papa Smurf fucking with me. But even with that thought I couldn't be sure. But these kinds of episodes were familiar too. I had experienced them many times already. At least that's how I felt. It didn't matter if it was jungle or not because it was all purgatory. There was another instance where Papa Smurf yelled back to me, "Hey, whatever you do, just don't pick up a rock and hit me in the back of the head with it." I thought, why the fuck would he say that? Is that what I'm supposed to do? I seriously had this mental dialogue in my head where I contemplated killing Papa Smurf because I somehow felt I was supposed to do that because he told me not to do it. Those words took on a strange significance. Eventually we made it out of the forest and to Papa Smurf's car. As we drove I contemplated the seeming fact that I was already dead and nothing really mattered because it had already happened and just kept repeating. I became obsessed with this idea. At one point Papa Smurf made an unexpected stop at an apartment complex. He knew the maintenance manager and wanted to say hi. He visited with his friend who was painting an apartment unit. I was unable to communicate, so I decided I'd go outside and look around. While sitting on the second-story stairs of the apartments we were at, a car pulled up. I was so convinced that I was reliving life in purgatory that I strongly considered yelling out some expletive simply for the fact that it wouldn't matter because it had already happened somehow. Everything I did or thought about doing was a repetition of something in purgatory that I had already done, and therefore my actions really didn't matter. Fortunately I didn't test my theory. Papa Smurf drove me back to my apartment, now about 4 p.m. I spent the next few hours contemplating everything that had happened. I began to regain my sanity. Throughout the first half of my trip I had accepted my experience as reality, and the fact that I had done drugs weighed little on my interpretation of that reality. During my latter solitude I began to realize that the substance had induced the experience. I knew I was not dead but somehow felt as though I had died and been put back together. The rest of my experience occurred in solitude. I continued to see tracers, bursts of color, and perceptual distortions, but they didn't matter. I spent the rest of my experience reflecting on what seemed the most profound experience I had ever had. I spoke with Papa Smurf late the next day. He confessed that he had added Datura seeds to the mix. He said he added the seeds so there was more volume in the coffee grinder. He didn't think there was enough for them to affect the experience. His guess was that he added about 70 to 100 Datura seeds. I've since experienced both Datura and woodrose by themselves. I think the combination somehow made the experience seem more real. In reflection, I can't help but think that such an experience could go horribly wrong. I seriously contemplated murder, jumping off a cliff, and calling someone a racial slur because of the weird mental space I was in. I feel like I could have done any of those things. On LSD there is always that part of you that knows that what you're experiencing is the result of the drug. I didn't have that with this experience. It was real. On the other hand, it was truly the most profound experience I've ever had. I mean, I was dead in purgatory and intimately aware that I was simply replaying my life for the billionth time. It's a bizarre state of mind to believe this. Though the thought of repeating it scares me, there is a part of me that wants to do it again.